Hey everyone, it's Jennifer Britton. I am really excited to be back with our February 2025 um, call. We've got people coming in live. We've also got many of you, I think, watching virtually. So wherever you are in the world, welcome back. We are committed here at Potentials Realized to have our community calls come back at least once a month. So hey Jane, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. We're talking today, sparking conversation in a world of change, and certainly lots of change happening in the world. This call is going to run for about 30 minutes, and I hope that it's really going to give you some ideas. So, the intent of today is to introduce you to one of our newest family members, and I'm excited. Many of you have probably heard me talk a little bit about the Reconnecting Workspaces dice that have been tested out for the last few years. The whole tagline of this product is sparking connection in a world of change. And so, whether you're working with people on career change, maybe you're working with new parents who are trying to figure it all out, what it means to have a new family member. Maybe you're working with people who have been laid off, or people at the community level looking at what's next for us. We all can benefit from a little bit of a zest. So, I want to share with you some of the framework of the Reconnecting Workspaces dice that I think, whether you have the tool or not, are going to provide you with some ground and some traction. And so to get us started, I'm actually coming back to an image we haven't seen here at Potentials Realized for a couple of years. And one of the things we know about change is that it's so important to help people create a pause, to think about what is next and what is possible. So I've got what I called in the pandemic the exercise of like what's outside your window, and I'm repurposing it for the doorways and windows into exploring change. So I want to give everyone a moment to catch their breath because literally in times of change, it feels like we are often breathless. And so this is a quick exercise to bring you here. I'd love you to lean into your screen and connect with an image that you are finding interesting. And as you find one, I want you to lean in, maybe even get a little bit more curious with what that looks like. It could be a doorway, it could also be a window. So you'll notice there are doors and windows here. But as you think about that one image, I want you to grab a pen, write it out, draw it out, and think about how does this connect for you as it relates to this notion of change. What do you see on this side of the door or window? What's available to you as you are in your journey right now? Take about 30 seconds to connect in with that. Notice what is there. Are there patterns? What's the energy like on this side of the door or the window? And now I want you to imagine that you open that door or that window. What do you see in front of you? What is on the other side of that door or window? Connect in with that for about 30 seconds. Jot down what you notice, what's there, who's there with you. Change activates so many interesting emotions. And at the heart, what we do as coaches is about supporting our clients from moving from where they are to where they want to go. And just like we did with this quick exercise, we want to help people get clear on where they are now, what it feels like, what's available, and then what's on the other side. So we did this in a pretty compressed way, but in essence, every coaching conversation, every coaching model is embedded in a similar element. So I want to open it up. I know we've got a couple of you on the call today, wondering if you're willing to share which one you chose, and what you noticed as you opened the door to change. Because I'm happy to go first. And what pulled my attention today, it was the second last row, third or fourth from the right-hand side, this brilliant set of blue doors with levers or louvers, as they would call it in the Caribbean, and these bright yellow flowers. And against the backdrop of a very white, very snow-filled world that I'm operating within, which only is really, browns and not a lot of blue sky or no yellow, it sort of really pulled my attention. And I imagined opening those doors. Notice that there are three sets, that as you opened even one door, it would open into this big expanse where there were lots of people and lots of resources on the other side, which is very different than living in a very snow-filled world. I just talked to someone. I said, how deep is your snow? And they said it's over 3.5 feet deep right now. That's pretty like it makes for a very, you know, challenging world to navigate, even if you're physically fit. And so I just imagine like the sunshine and the flowers and the freedom that exists within that space. So what else? What did you choose? Is anyone willing to share what they chose? All right, Jane, what did you choose today?
Uh, so if I got yours correctly, then mine is just above yours. It's the one with it's the window, I think, rather than a door. Uh, so it's the one with an open window, which
Nice.
is green in color and part closed. So it's from the bottom, I think it's the third row, and it's the sort of the second from the right.
Excellent. What does that represent for you? What emerged as you looked at that
Um,
window and what might be on the other side?
Yeah, I chose this one because first of all, it's open, or it's partly open. So I think it kind of described my current uh, sort of stage or situation. Is that just like I see learning and opportunities, um, but because I also have some time constraints, so it's not like full blown, but it's sort of like half there. So to me, when I think about it, it also states a little bit of the unknown. But for me, it's like I'm kind of willing to step into it, but I also be cautious. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I came up with.
I love that. And I love like just the layers of that in even a few minutes of picking an image, right? One thing with change, and I've been sharing different images for many years with different groups. Last year, I was working with a group of 100 leaders in a room, and we had a few hours together. And I kicked off with a similar exercise to this. And what was really amazing was how the photographs, the images really spoke to people in very different ways. So, Ivana, would you be willing to like share what you picked today?
Sure, sure. Thanks, Jen. So I initially my eye went to the same one as you, and then I'm like, no, keep scrolling and see what else is there.
Ooh,
And so I landed on the second row, fifth from the left.
okay.
Yeah.
Ooh,
And for me, this like it really kind of talks to the earth tones, the grounding energy.
mm,
And I imagine the doors in between are wood and the teal it really drew me. And so when you said like what's on the other side, I just saw like it was really a lot of dark, but also like a light to follow
yeah,
that leads to a garden. So I was like, as much as this is very earth tones, it was also very close, but on the other side, there's a lot of expansiveness.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's sort of fun when we think about what's on the other side. And if you're not expecting it, then some really interesting things can emerge. So,
Yeah.
my intent today was like, how do we spark conversations? And just like we did with this quick exercise, this is something you might do with a group or a team or an individual just to get them thinking. Because I think sometimes we think about the word change and it can feel so many things. There could be a lot of emotions that come up. There could be lots of unclarity. There could be a lot of urgency. There could be like some exhaustion even. And so this is just another way, a doorway or a window into the conversation. So my intent today is to also like share some of these tools. I've really been working over the last year in taking some of the things that already existed, and I'm just going to reach over here, like many of you are familiar with the 90-day guide for success. These are 90 core areas that really are becoming quite um, like I can't think of the word. I want to say undated, but undated is not the word. They're just really like timeless topics that we all want to look at. Things like vision, team effectiveness, building relationships, communication, time management, getting organized, routines, empathy, delegation, co-working. And so
Mm.
one of the fun projects I've been sort of embarking on a very high level is translating books into other products. And so I'm going to just share them with you. You can look at this image here. I'm going to just expand this out, and it won't expand out, but you'll see the book. And then we've got the cards now. So I thought for those that haven't seen the card deck, this now translates the book into some cards. So Jane, you get to be the lucky one to pick a number between 31 and 60. And we'll just see what emerges in the cards this afternoon. What is a number you want to pick?
I just pick 45.
45. Okay. Let's see what number 45 is. And because I've been doing this for many, many moons, it's always interesting what emerges with day 45, which might have actually just, it fell on the ground. Isn't that interesting? So day
Wow.
45 fell on the ground. I'm going to just go to it here. It is all about the messy middle. So the messy middle fell to the ground. Here's what Richard Branson said. If you find yourself stuck in the middle, there is only one way to go: forward. So this is in the book, but it's also a quote. And I think a lot of people are feeling right now like they are actually in the messy middle. That's the name of a book, but I wrote about this back in 2018 because what I was noticing at the time was people were really getting stuck in the change process, right? And some of our work is not just only helping people articulate that vision, but help them as they're in the stuckness of the work. So here's a couple of tips or suggestions. If you find that you are coaching someone in that messy middle, here's some things that you might explore with your client. Number one, helping them revisit their vision. Right? Think about how when we get to reconnect with our vision, it may create new energy, different energy. Sometimes reconnecting with the vision is positive and it pulls us forward. Sometimes also it can activate some sadness because we might feel like we're actually a little bit further away from the vision than where we're at. What's interesting with coaching is many writers, many researchers assert that we will not get into change unless the pain is big enough. Think about
Mm,
that, right? Will we really make a change if everything feels okay? Possibly. But will we make a change if it really doesn't feel good? Probably more apt to move if the pain is there. Now it's an interesting question because are you driven by pain or pleasure? That is like the basic of human needs. And so bullet number two, option number two of how you might get unstuck in the messy middle, consider what strengths or superpowers you can lean into. And many of you know my affinity. I've got the superpowers a little bit later on in this presentation, but we are all different types of coaches. Our clients also have their own working style. So how do you really activate those strengths to get some traction going? I'll just share one more because there are six on here, but another potential option is focusing on what's important in the big picture to isolate milestones and anchors. So when change is more at that macro level, as some of us are seeing right now, how do we notice those big anchors? There's a lot of things that we could be doing. I'm so fascinated, Jane, that you picked the messy middle. It's interesting because last week I was working with another group and they are literally in the middle. It was the midpoint of a 25-day process. Day 13, what card emerged? The messy middle. So as someone who is trained by a scientist, this is not to say there's woo-woo, but I'm always intrigued by how these creative sparkers create something new. So learning or insights. I wanted to hear, Jane, what are your thoughts? You picked number 45. How does the messy middle connect for you in your work, your conversations right now?
So I picked 45 randomly. I have no idea that it's going to be the messy middle. So I'm not like a fortune teller or anything. But it's really very interesting because I think I'm trying to, the reason I came into this conversation today is that um, me and my colleague, we're going to actually work on something. Um, at this time, I'll just call it a presentation, but it is not a real presentation. It's maybe it's more pretty called like a space for connection for our middle level managers to help them or to support them to go through change.
Yeah.
Because one thing we found out that in our group managers is that um, a, a lot of them are not very comfortable with the grade.
None of us are. None of
Yeah,
us are.
so we're trying to like having this connection piece. So I the reason I come here is I just like to see what kind of ideas emerge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the messy middle is really like what we are going through right now. Because our company just had a big restructuring, a number of people, a big layoff like last November. And I think the what we're right now is in the middle because things have settled, but we are in the middle of like just trying to see how what the new will become
Yeah.
will be like. Yeah. So I think it's very appropriate. So
It's
so
very
thank you.
appropriate. I got to move along because I actually have another card from the deck, which talks about the dip, right? If we imagine that any change process is sort of like it's the ups and downs, this is an evolution of what we know about any change process, right? Like we could have a good change, like, oh, I get married. And at the start of that, we're really excited. It's like we're in that honeymoon phase where it's like, woohoo, everything is great. And then the reality sets in, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I really cut out for this? Like, imagine a new job, right? Like the first week, it's often like, oh, I'm so excited. And then the reality sets in. Am I cut up for this? And then it's like, yeah, I think I got it. And, we go back up the change curve. And then something happens, and it's like, oh my gosh, I really don't know how to do this. Like, I've found my way. I understand my role, but now I'm hitting another dip. And hopefully at that point, people show up, like people like you, Jane, and your colleague who are facilitating a conversation around what do you need? But at some point, we do hit this big dip. And the dip is a little different than the messy middle as well, right? The dip is really that space where people often get paralyzed. And
Mm.
that is where, in some frameworks, like I used to do a lot of work around this in cross-cultural leadership, people bottom out and they typically bottom out not just in the midpoint, but actually two-thirds of the first half of any timed project. So let's say you're running a project of 2 years, they're going to hit the dip, which is a little different than the messy middle. They're going to hit that dip at two-thirds of the first half. So in my former work, I would support people typically on a 2-year assignment. And I knew that at that month 4 and 5, we saw it anecdotally, and then we saw it from research that this dip was a really significant point at which, as a leader, it was so important for, me to also help the person think about what resources did they have available, what clarity did they want or need, how could they tap into their mentor, what skills were they needing, and how could they really take that forward, not only with me as their supervisor, but with others in the network. And so what's interesting is if we don't find bottom, right, like a swimming pool, if we don't find bottom and push off, people will tend to cocoon. And this is where we see the burnout increasing, the disengagement, and the active disengagement. So I wanted to bring, I'm really glad that you bring this in, Jane, because I was going to bring in the dip in addition to the messy middle, because we can also be really like curious what's going to happen. And so how do we address it? So this is where I want to share, and this is really now from the Reconnecting Workspaces DICE process. We want to do four things in the whole process. We want to first pause. Notice how I brought you into today's call, right? There's an image. Let's pause and reflect on it. You could be using the Reconnecting Workspaces dice, and we roll the dice. So these are different images. There's 90 different images in the whole set. We could roll the messy middle. Notice this image, right? That's the image that might come up. And so we'd pause and go, huh, what's happening? And on this dice, on this image, it looks like it's pretty clean. But even seeing it, I might say, wow, am I really in the midpoint right now? And I might feel like, oh yeah, I'm in the midpoint. So we can pause. We then want to focus. What's happening? What's emerging? What's going on in this space? That might be a whole other conversation, right? It's one thing to notice, it's one thing to pause, but it's the next thing to notice with the focus. Now, is focus enough? What if I now understand that in the messy middle, my biggest problem is that I do not have a support network as an employee. I do not have a support network. I don't know where to go. Like I'm getting stuck on that. That then means I've got to now create something. I've got to start creating a support network. Or maybe it's an entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur realizes, you know what, I'm at this midpoint. We are facing challenges, constraints. I need to now go and create something. And that leads us finally to activate, to actually get into action. So this is the Reconnecting Workspaces conversation sparker sort of framework. It's about pause, it's about focus, it's about create, and it's about activate. In saying that, I think it's also a really important part of the change cycle as well. And that's what we're going to be dipping into. So, like today's call is just 30 minutes, but in a couple of weeks, on February 17th, I'm doing this 3-hour workshop virtually. I don't think anyone's joining me live in Barbados, but we're going to be digging into like lots of different tools to help people and help ourselves as coaches also think about like, what do people need to get out of what might feel like a whirlpool at the moment? And many people around the world are in that messy middle as we speak. So I'm going to pause here and just see, out of this frame, and we'll go back to the four, out of the pause, focus, create, activate. Let me ask you both and those listening, which of the four areas are you most comfortable in, right? When you coach with yourself, what are you most comfortable with? Is it the pause? Is it the focus? Is it the create? Is it the activate? I'm curious. And I think we all will have different ones. They might also be related to, I'm going to go out of this share for a minute just to find the one that I want. They might also be related to your superpowers. So I'm going to just bring in a slide here. I think I might have to create it as we go. But our superpowers allow us to be true to who we are. So, Ivana, you are well versed with the superpowers. Here's another little slide, right? Be true to who you are. Party hat and everything. When you think about your superpowers and change, what do you know you can always activate, Ivana?
I would probably say the pause,
Mm-hmm.
leaning into the grounded labyrinth.
Grounded labyrinth
Really,
energy. Yeah.
yeah, just that, like that pause. Because to me, the pause is really about awareness and helping people slow down, you know, um, enough to, especially in a world of change. Many people, the people I work with at least, want to just get through it. And
Mm-hmm.
so they disconnect from, the experience of grief, loss, whatever that is, or maybe identity. that has gotten them to this point. I'm just thinking about Marshall Goldsmith, like what got you here is not going to get you there. And so the whole idea of that pause and really celebrating the things that got you to this point, but also acknowledging the things that might not help you in the next leg of your change journey, your change process.
Yeah. And I love that because I think the pause, right, is so important. Are we really
Yeah,
pausing long enough to notice? Like we did at that exercise at the start, are we pausing like, I actually need to think about, am I this image or that image? Like,
yeah,
is this really my experience or is it that? Or is it a blend? If we don't pause to
yeah,
think about it, we may be actually coming in with a lot of assumptions. So
yeah.
it's interesting. You start with pause. I always go to the create, right? Like my natural MO as a creative firecracker and tool master is what can I create to create the expanse? So when I started even pulling this presentation together, I was like, what am I going to do? Because I've got so many resources. I've been working on a book on coaching and change for 18 months now. It's like, what do I want to bring? And I could have brought 50 different slides, but I was like, let's start with the doorway, right? Because I think the doorway and our choice of doorway really then infuses what we do in the journey of change, right? It's like, am I feeling resourceful? Am I feeling like my door is this big and I am little? Or am I going to the Hobbit door and I'm like the giant, right? Like that's a very different mindset as well. So I typically naturally go to the create, which I think there really is a bit of a connection here with the superpowers. So Jane, I don't know,
Absolutely.
have you seen my coaching superpower quiz before? Have you taken it?
Did. I actually took
You
it over
did.
the
Okay, so
weekend.
what are you? Do you remember what you are?
Yeah, I am actually just hold on a minute.
Okay. So Jane's gonna go get it. I love this. And if you haven't taken the superpower
Because I only
quiz,
remember one word. I only remember the lighthouse. Oh, the spiral
you're the
lighthouse. So
spiral lighthouse. So you're like one third of coaches who have taken this quiz. So when you think about the lighthouse, how does that connect with this notion of change?
that's a great question. I never thought about it. Um, but when Ivana mentioned about pause, um, I think that is where also I see that as one of my strengths because like in a coaching conversation, I'm quite comfortable with silence. So if my coach or my client just want not to say anything, I usually let the silence just percolate, and then when they're ready to say something, then I move on. Yeah. So that's so so maybe to answer your question is that for people who want to, like, if they're in the change and they want to really do something quickly, is to give them that space so that they can actually pause. And then Ivana also mentioned the word called celebrate. I never linked celebrate with pause, but I thought, yeah,
Mhm.
celebrate is like when you actually take time to see how much you have gone in the journey. So I
Yeah.
really like that. So thank you. Thank you, Ivana.
So to
And
build, and I'll just, you're thinking about your people, right? What would it be like if you start a call with a quick win, right? We've always talked about the importance of quick wins, but in a time of change, it's even more important to help people get out of that stuck, messy middle, right? Starting a call with the quick win can put them in that appreciative space. And this is something that I'm writing about in this new book. And it really works. Like last week, I was with a pretty large group. We meet on a quarterly basis and we have for about 3, 4 years. So it's an established group. And you could just tell as people came onto the call, the heaviness, the weight. And instead of just diving right in, I was like, we're going to start with a quick win. Like, what's one thing you want to celebrate? And people
mm,
said, like, it was an hour and a half call. People said by the end, it was like, I'm so glad we started here because as much as there are important issues that we need to talk through, it's changed the way I could come to the conversation. And I think for most leaders today, the weight of the world is such that it's like, it's really hard, but how do we resource ourselves? And it is often with the pause slash celebrate so that people can focus, come up with creative solutions, and then really activate it, really go out with themselves, with their teams, with their communities to really affect the change because it's ongoing. So I love that. Jade, go
May I
ahead.
ask a question, please?
Say that again.
May I ask a question, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. What's your question?
It's more for for me for clarification. So because you have four dice, like you have four
Four
containers.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah, four containers. Is it like and they're different colors? So each container refers to one of those. Like one container refers to pause, is that how it works?
No. So all the containers can have all four of the flow. I've just kept it in those colors. It doesn't have to be like, this is our blue, and so this is just about pausing. You can do all of them. But just in terms of presenting it, I wanted to get people thinking that, these are really four steps, right? It is about pausing. Let's take time to do that before we then get focused into whatever the topic or issue is. As we think about the topic or issue, we can then explore what are the different options in order to create a solution. And from that creation space, we then want to make the bridge to how do we activate it. So I love your feedback though, because it's a new model and it's the first time I've had the opportunity to sort of present it. I wanted to keep the colors, but the beautiful thing about the dice is in each set, there are actually 18 faces. So you can roll like literally so many different combinations. So would you like me to roll a set and we can see what emerges? How about we just do that for 1 minute? We got 1 minute here. I did 3 dice. So the first one that came up is the compass. And the compass maps to day number 12 of the book. So you could look at a card, you could look at the book. I'll pull open the book. And even when you think about context, if we paused on that word, what is the context? Probably a lot would emerge. I want to give you a little quote though to go with that. This is something I wrote in PlanDoTrack. So it's from 2018, still relevant today. So I said in 2018, today's VUCA context is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a context where things are changing radically and rapidly, and good enough has become a mantra. So you might even start with a pause around a quote like that. What comes to mind, leader, as you think about your current context? What is changing rapidly or radically? Give people a minute or two to write it down. So that's the pause. Okay. That's part one. So we did 3 dice. Are you ready for dice number 2?
Sure.
Okay. Dice number 2. This is vision. What's your vision? Think about how important it is when we go to any change process to come back to vision. In fact, one of the books I'm reading right now that I'd recommend to any coach working in this space is Richard Boyatzis's. It's right here. The science of change. And so Boyatzis, he is out of Case Northwestern University. He has found actually one of the most important parts of the change process is reconnecting people with their vision. So they've got scientific proof that it's not just anecdotal, like I've said for years, connect people with vision. There's scientific proof, which shows that we've got to connect people to vision. And as we do that, as we focus into vision, it allows us to see what's possible. What is the creative space? And then here's what's interesting. Third dice that came up, strengths. How do you use your strengths to activate? To activate, right? We've got to use what we have at our disposal. And so are we using our strengths? Are we aware of our strengths? Are we leaning into our strengths? So it's interesting and no surprise. Every time I roll the dice, there's some relevance.
So is there guidance? Like if we say get a set, like that
Yeah,
like the way that you
so what comes with every little one is actually this little card, which goes into, so each one has 3 dice, 18 sets. So you see what the actual word is. Like we did the vision, right? Vision is number 4. It may not be so clear there.
Yeah.
Then we rolled strengths, right? Number 13. And also the context or VUCA, which is number 12. So when people get this, they have the option to get a PDF copy of the book. So that if you're using this in your workshop, like I did, I could say, oh, you know what? Let's look at the quote for day 12. And you can read out that quote that I just read out. And that becomes part of the conversation. So there you go. That's how I love that you've asked that, Jane, because I wasn't going to say like how they're all connected, but they really are all connected. Whether you choose to do roll of the dice, whether you prefer, again, some organizations are loving the cards, right? Because people like to touch them. It's like, ooh, what's this? This one's red. What does it mean for red? Red is teams. So you might take the conversation down the pathway of teams, or you might take the pathway down difficult conversations. So these are truly sparkers, right? That was the name of today's topic. It's like conversation sparkers, sparking for change. What doorway do we go in? Do we go in the dice? Do we go in the cards? Do we randomly pick a number? Do we ask, what does it mean to pause, focus, create, activate? Like you've got 50 hours of creation here. So,
Thank you so much. Like so many options. I think that's what I'm looking for. And my last question is, how do I choose which container to buy? Like if I want.
yeah, well, so you've got 5 colors. You might choose just, I want to go with color because I like, maybe someone likes yellow and they're like, I want yellow. I'm blue. I started with blue and that's days 1 through 18. Um, they're all 18 in the span of 90. And so we have had people buy all 5 because they want to have all 5 and they're working with teams or groups or individual clients. Like we've done, you could do this with individual clients as well. So
But the PDF book covers the entire.
it covers the whole thing. So this book is 476 pages. For the first time, we're now doing it as a PDF because it's so much easier to have on your laptop if you're coaching or facilitating, and you can just look for like, oh, someone's picked strengths. Okay, that's day 12. Let's go to day 12. And what is part of it too, and this is where we've had a lot of leaders taking the book, buying the book for their employees or their team members, because it's not just about, and I'll just go to a random day, productivity. It's not just about the quote and the focus and some tips, but for the employee, it's also about the reflection for them. Now what? What is important about this topic to you? And so every day has a couple of inquiries that people can reflect on. And so what employees have found is this becomes then their 90-day guide, right? It becomes their 90 days where, especially if they're a new leader or new employee, they can be like, ooh, I hadn't really thought about what does it mean to be personally productive, right? Like we talk about time management, but what does that mean for me? And focus question, what's going to help me be most productive? As a leader, we might have time to talk about that, but probably not. So now the employee is prompted to think about it. So there you go, Jane. I'll ask you as you go as a takeaway, what's your next step with all of this?
I'm going to pause
Good. And
and
reflect, it sounds
think
like.
about the um and think about the conversation, like about what I learned today and how I can uh like apply. I think like yeah, there's just so many things to think about. Like there's just so many ideas. Yeah. So
Yeah.
because for today, I actually when I first came in, I thought that it was about the charms because I actually read about your conversation about the charm. I think I saw a video.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I wonder if I can use that with the with my group of leaders. Yes, and
It's
I
another
saw that
doorway. Yeah.
that you have a sale on this. So I was just thinking, okay, I want to learn a little bit more about uh like I think it's 18, right? Like the charms. Like and I just
Yeah. The
yeah,
charms
I
are
just think
40.
they look fascinating. And now like today, like we learned about the discs, like
Dice.
the dice. So now I have to think about, okay, so what comes first? I think that's my question. Okay, so what do I
Mm,
get first? Or how
yeah.
do I move ahead? Yeah.
So what do you get first or do you do a bundle? So there are bundles available. And I think for people who are facilitating all week long, it's a treat, right? It's like, I'm going to get a set of the dice. I'm going to get a set of the charms. I'm going to get one of the cards. And with that, as we've seen, you've probably got hundreds of hours of conversations. So as a coach, right, we never need that much more, but these are just fun things that are now, as I'm going to talk about in a few weeks at the February 17th workshop, make things more memorable. How do we stand out? How do they remember, oh, I was with Jane and she brought those charms? Or, hey, I was with Ivana and she had the cards. Or, oh, I was with Jen and she did the dice. So it's to really help people become like focused and intentional in
Mhm.
today's world of change because we don't retain things the same way.
Mhm.
So, Ivana, final words from you. What has this sparked for you today?
Well, thanks, Jen, for a great conversation. I'm really at that point of that middle point, and what the aha, the self-discovery I had is like in the middle point is again is like where how far we've grown in this change process, and so how can I use I actually am really attracted. I'm going to say I've got the charms, Jane, and they're amazing. They're in Italy with me. I had a family member come from Canada, so I stocked up on everything that Jen had for sale and got it all. And I'm using it with one-on-one clients, groups, everything. But what I with today's conversation, Jen, I'm really intrigued by the cards. And the
Yeah.
reason why I'm intrigued, because you and I have done a lot of dice work, but the cards, I think in a group coaching conversation, like you can have someone just pick a card, whether they know the number or not, and that it can be an individual focus as it relates to wherever they are in their own change process. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really, so you can use the prompts of pause, focus, create, and activate, but allow someone to go deeper in whatever that theme and that card they're holding on to. And I think it's actually going to really brings another layer of transformation and insight using those cards. So we haven't talked a lot about the cards, but the cards are what I want to focus on. That's what I
Yes.
want to focus on.
And so one of the meta themes in change is we all go through change differently. We want something
Yeah.
different. We get activated in different ways. And so I really appreciate that the three of us have been able to say, huh, I like the charms. I like the cards. I love the dice, right? So it's all options, but it sparks new insights and new doorways. So
Absolutely.
thanks for
So
playing with
thank
us
you.
today. I really have enjoyed the call. And Jane, you've
Here,
prompted me.
thank
I think
you.
in the March call, I'll have to bring the charms in. So, with that, I'm going to put up just one more time the invite, join me for anyone listening. If you're on the fence, we're going to spend 3 hours looking at charms, looking at dice, looking at the cards in much deeper process aligned with experiential learning. Like, how do we really do
Mm.
this masterfully? And that's what the February 17th 3 hour workshop is about. So, if you got intrigued today, I've left you with some open loops intentionally. And that's where we're going to close some of those loops 2 weeks yesterday, virtually. And that'll be the first of a series of quarterly workshops. So it's a one off, but it's also going to be, I'll be doing something different every quarter. Ivana,
Is there a
question?
slide, Jen, with a QR
Yeah,
code or
I'll just
something for
I'll
that?
bring that up if that's okay. And I know we're getting to the end of the call. So let me just go here. Just want to sort of show this, right? There will
Right.
be something February, May, September, December for the different play shops, as I'm calling them. And then let's see if I've got it here. You can scan
There we
that
go.
code there. And I'm calling this whole body the experiential roadshow. So whether it's the charms, whether it's the dice, whether it's the cards, they're all part of the experiential roadshow, which, like we talked about today, you'll notice the different colors of the pathway. Ecosystem connector coaches might connect in differently with a spiral lighthouse coach. A grounded labyrinth coach might want something different. But I do think that those 4 areas that we looked at, the pause, as it says here on the dice, the pause, the focus, the create, and the activate, those are definitely 4 steps that we want to take people through.
Does the book go deeper into those 4 steps, Jen?
It doesn't. It does not. But the new book on change will. So
Okay.
again, the work keeps building as I
Yes.
bring it out. And I want to just thank you both for your validation of like books are great, But I know in the last 3 years, since this has been out in the world, people haven't engaged or had conversations like they have, like we've had today with the dice,
Mhm.
the cards, and the charms. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have,
you. Wow.
have a good afternoon. Be well. Thanks for joining us, Jane, and keep me posted on how it goes.
Great.